We're working with a group of researchers from places like Stanford, UC Santa Barbara, Nature Conservancy, a bunch of different organizations to try and figure out what is it that drives one reef to that high coral cover state and another reef to that high algal cover state. Because there are thresholds in the system that push a reef one direction versus another. And if we can actually understand what the interactions are between those different organisms and why a reef goes one way versus another, we can begin to use that information for management. For example, one of the questions I often have is if you're interested in a healthy reef and you're interested in the bottom staying clean so that you can have good environment for corals, does that just mean you need things like parrotfish and surgeonfish to keep it clean? What about the sharks? What about the groupers? Do they make any difference? Conservation is a whole lot easier if you don't have to protect them. There's a whole bunch of questions like that that are about management trade-off decisions. What kind of fisheries management do you need? What kind of water quality management do you need? What kind of development? And what combinations of those different kinds of actions will lead to a relatively healthy reef and a relatively degraded reef? There's actually a lot of information out there we can use to try and answer that question in a way that's better than, yeah, I think maybe this is the right answer. And so one of the things that I believe is that in the field right now, we're seeing a whole lot of movement toward understanding these interactions on a reef, understanding the feedback loops that keep one reef healthy versus another one unhealthy, and we can use that for management. And some of the good news is, when you look at that global scale, we can start to see that there's actually some fairly significant things happening on coral reefs at a global scale. This is in one way a very hopeful map. This map shows the extent of protected areas on coral reefs. This comes again from that Reefs at Risk document that I showed you earlier. In this case, what they've done is they've looked at all the coral reefs around the world and they've said, well, how much coral reef habitat is out there? And then how much of it is in various forms of protection? And it turns out that a whopping 27% of the world's coral reefs are in some form of protected area. This is protected area from certain forms of fishing, which is actually really good news. That's an enormous fraction. That's better than most other kinds of ecosystems in the world. And there's reasons to celebrate. What that means is that conservation actions are actually happening at a scale that's relevant to coral reefs globally. The bad news is only 6% of those reefs are in effectively managed protected areas. And what that means is that from a conservation perspective, our focus doesn't need to be on making new parks on reefs. Our focus needs to be on making those parks that are there work. It has to be about management, not about new lines on a map. I love new parks, and I'll be happy to see new parks on reefs. But we have so many parks on the reefs around the world that are not being effectively managed that is our place where we can make a huge amount of progress relatively quickly on figuring out how you not only have a park in place, but that park yields to changes, in this case, in the number of fishes that are on the reef.